There's no doubt that the 9-inch rear end overall has more potential to hold up to high horsepower than an 8-inch rear end does. There are more parts, there are more options, there are a lot of things you can do to a 9-inch that you can that will allow you to put it behind really high horsepower engines. But I'll point out again, my application, it's a street application, and while my 347 is going to have a decent amount of horsepower, certainly a lot more than the 100 and something horsepower that the stock V8 in my Mustang was able to muster. And so I don't need, something that would go behind a pro stock car, for instance. I really just need to beef it up to handle appropriately the horsepower that I'm going to lay down to it. And the 8-inch rear end that's already in the car is capable of doing that, provided you make some upgrades to it. And so what I have in front of me are the things that are key to making that happen. Right here, I have a couple of Yukon steel axles. And these are 5-lug, so I can convert my car from 4-lug, the 4-lug factory setup, to a 5-lug setup. I've got Willwood brakes that are going to go on it. I'll make another video on the brakes. Now, if I had, for instance, a first-generation Mustang, I could just order a pair of axles for it. But since I'm dealing with a Mustang 2, I don't really have a direct replacement option. And so Yukon and a couple other companies make sort of universal axles. They're designed specifically for an 8-inch, and you can get them in 28 or 31 spline, whichever is your choice. But what they do is they make them longer. And this splined area right here can be cut down to wherever you want it. And so all I have to do is pull out the stock axle, lay it next to this axle, mark the end of it, and cut this one off. And then you can just use a grinder to sort of put a small bevel on the end of it so that it slides into the housing nicely. This is something that's very easy to do. You can do it in a bunch of different ways. You can use a cutoff wheel, you can use a bandsaw. I have a chop saw, and I'm going to use that. It'll put a nice clean cut on it. But by doing this, I'll have a set of axles that are substantially stronger than the stock axles, and allow me to convert to 5-lug so that I can put better brakes and bigger wheels. So over here, this is where the real strength comes in. So this is a brand new 8-inch housing. It's not a Ford housing. It's not a reconditioned Ford housing. This is a brand new casting, and it's nodular iron. And those of you in the Ford community that have dealt with older Fords might know the name nodular from the strongest of the factory 9-inch rear end housings. Ford made a special run of what they called the nodular housing, and they actually cast a capital letter N directly into the housing on those factory nodular housings. The aftermarket ones never do have that N on them, but the factory Ford ones did. Nodular iron is basically just a high-strength version of the cast iron. The nodule refers to how the molecules are formed and the matrix that they form within the metal. And that's where its strength comes from. Nodular cast iron is stronger overall than standard cast iron. Now, in addition to the nodular housing, I have a billet aluminum pinion support. This is made of very, very high strength heat treated aluminum. And then a steel yoke. And the steel yoke allows me to use a pretty standard. You can use, you tell them when you order this, you tell them what size U-joint or what type of U-joint you want. One of the standard ones, 1330, 1320, 1310, whatever you choose for your application. So I've got a steel yoke, a billet aluminum pinion support, and a nodular housing. And mounted, it wants to roll the blanket, so I guess I better move instead of trying to move it. Mounted on the back side here is a brand new ring and pinion set. And that ring and pinion set is mounted to a Yukon Grizzly locker. And I'll talk about the gear ratio later. I know there's going to be a zillion comments about how, you should put like 540 gears in it or something like that. Again, street-driven car. And so you have to choose a gear ratio that's going to allow you to get performance out of it, but also still allow it to be driven. Now, I do have an overdrive transmission, which means I can put lower gears and still have a drivable car. But by the same token, I definitely want that performance and I want drivability. I want a combination of the two. But I also want strength. So the Yukon locker is going to allow me to spread power equally to both tires and allow me to do nice, straight, dark, even burnouts. At the same time, it's because it's a locker, it'll allow me to corner when I need to, unlike a spool, which is what I've run in earlier, in other Mustangs that I've owned. So brand new nodular housing with the pinion support and the yoke, along with a brand new set of gears and a locker, feeding power through to steel 5-lug axles. And so keeping the stock housing in the car, but everything that goes in it is being replaced. And so for a street application, this is plenty. This is going to do fine for me. Again, there's a lot of people that think you can't do anything unless you put a 9-inch in it. And in my experience, that's just not the case. I do need to upgrade these parts because my engine, my 347, will put out a decent amount of power, and it's a 5-speed car, and it's got a dual clutch transmission, which means the clutch is capable of putting down the power hard and heavy with much less slippage, which means I can shock the suspension and I can shock the drivetrain pretty hard when I dump the clutch. And so if I didn't do anything about this stuff, I could blow it up. I could break an axle. I could shatter the housing. I could strip the gears. The factory parts really are not designed to hold up to any sort of abuse whatsoever. And so it's about finding a balance. At its best, in a perfect world, in laboratory conditions, with the fuel injection tuned in absolutely perfect, I might be able to squeeze somewhere in the 450 range out of my 347 with the heads that are on it and the cam that's in it and so forth. It's not supercharged. It's not a crazy engine. It's just a good, solid, naturally aspirated engine. And so it has good potential to lay down power enough that I would almost certainly destroy the factory parts. But these are really easy upgrades to do. The rear end housing just has a set of perimeter nuts that hold it on. The housing has studs that stick out, one gasket on here. The axles you know, there's a flange where the bearing is in the end of the axle housing, and just 4 bolts hold that on. So you remove the 4 bolts, slide the axle out, and then you can remove the housing out and pull the whole housing off. It's really easy to do. An hour or 2, and you can swap out these parts once the axles are cut down, of course, and then I'll have to press on the new bearings. But this is my plan for the rear end housing. I'll take the stock housing out, I'll sandblast it, paint it, clean it up, and then install these new parts, and I'll be ready to go. Of course, a new drive shaft will be in order to connect that TKX transmission to this rear end housing, but I'll save that for another video.